The Republican Party and Trump campaign trying to stop vote counting in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan. This Thursday, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza and his Iranian counterpart Javad Zarif met to analyze the challenges faced in the face of contact threats from the U.S. government. John Magufuli was sworn in for a second 5-year term as president of Tanzania. The ceremony was attended by several African leaders. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm GLADYS QUESADA from the TeleSUR headquarters in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. Stay with us. And it's the second day after the U.S. elections, and they are still too close to call. The final results hinges on the states of Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. The Trump campaign has launched legal bids to stop the counts in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Michigan. President Trump said on Twitter to stop the count. Meanwhile, the Republican Party of Nevada has just confirmed they plan to file a lawsuit in Nevada, claiming that around 10,000 votes were cast by people who no longer live in the state. Nevada has one of several states to send postal ballots to every adult that is registered to vote. Trump railed against the universal mail-in ballot system decision during his campaign, claiming that it will lead to fraud, although there is no evidence of wide-scale voter fraud in any major U.S. election. Nevada is an essential state, as it provides the last 6 electoral votes that the Democrat Biden needs to win. It's Thursday, and we still don't know who the next president of the United States is going to be. Here's how the key states are looking now. Nevada still has around 25% of its votes to count. For its part, Arizona, with 11 electoral votes, called for Biden, but seems still in play. Trump needs to win nearly 2/3 of the remaining votes. In Georgia, the Republican presidential candidate leads the race for the state's 16 electoral votes, but with only 0.5 percentage difference. Trump also is ahead in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. So far, Nevada, Michigan, and Wisconsin called for Biden. In Wisconsin, with 10 electoral votes, if Biden's winning margin is less than 1%, then Trump is entitled to a recount, which the campaign say they will demand. Meanwhile, protesters marched and rallied across the U.S. on Wednesday as the presidential election remained too close to call. Most demonstrations were large, peaceful events organized by progressive groups calling on officials to count every vote. But in some cities, including Phoenix and Detroit, Trump supporters converged on vote-counting centers. In New York City, thousands marched past boarded-up luxury stores on Manhattan's Fifth Avenue as ballots were still being tallied in key battleground states. Similar protests took place in at least half a dozen cities, including Los Angeles, Seattle, Houston, Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, and San Diego. Demonstrators gathered outside Dallas City Hall in Texas, and in Chicago, protesters demanding a complete count marched through downtown and along a street across the river from the Trump Tower. The demonstrations came after Donald Trump threatened to sue his way to the presidency, launching lawsuits on Wednesday to halt vote counting in 3 battleground states. It is not clear that the challenges will alter the election result.
The message in general was to make sure that the political establishment knows that we're not going to just take the votes or take the election being stolen backing down or sitting down. We're going to turn out.
I think maybe the first mistake we all make is to assume that our democracy was doing a good thing in the first place. I think there's so many flaws in our democracy well before Donald Trump became president, well before he started saying these ridiculous things about a fraudulent election, these totally unfounded claims. So I think first we have to acknowledge that our democracy needs rehabilitation in so many ways. I think now is a time that we should question all of our institutions, including the Electoral College. These are things we should be questioning. They don't necessarily make sense. Not to say they made sense when they were first enacted. They were enacted in a very different world and by people who had also a lot of concentrated power. So yeah, I think we absolutely should be rethinking how we structure our votes.
We are not going to allow the President of the United States to interfere in the function of our democracy. Hell no! We've been listening to him for years. It is time for our voice to be heard. Yeah.
It's clear to me that Joe Biden won this election. It's clear to me that Donald Trump wants to do anything he can do to undermine that reality. And we, the people of New York, are just out here to demand that every vote be counted because every vote counts.
We want to make sure that the community knows, the city knows, the country knows that we're in favor of counting every single ballot that comes in. That is the way our democracy is supposed to work.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said Thursday that the next U.S. president will have to give in to Iran, no matter which candidate wins. Rouhani added that Trump ruthlessly intensified the sanctions even in the coronavirus time.
Nevertheless, I'm confident the Iranian nation will be victorious ultimately. The U.S. election results might be known by tonight or tomorrow, and we will know who won, but it's not important. Whoever takes office, the next government with no doubt will surrender to the Iranian people. The gentleman who was at the White House ruthlessly intensified the sanctions even in the coronavirus times. He intensified the war. They were not committed to any principles, neither human principles nor human rights, nor international law and regulations.
Most of UN General Assembly members support the Palestinian cause and reject the actions by the U.S. government of Tel Aviv also, which tramples on the rights of the Arab people under occupation. When regarding the UN General Assembly's Fourth Committee, Cuba presented 2 draft resolutions under the theme Report on Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices affecting human rights of Palestinian people and other Arabs of occupied territories. After voting, both documents were approved with the support of a majority of member states. The draft resolution, titled Israeli Practices Affecting the Human Rights of the Palestinian People in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem, won 138 votes for 9 against and 16 abstentions. And we'll go now to a short break, but stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. This Thursday, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza and his Iranian counterpart Javad Zarif met to analyze the challenges faced in the face of constant threats from the U.S. government. The Samuel Robinson Institute organized the meeting, named Venezuela and Iran in Defense of the World to Make. Both foreign ministers committed themselves to the alliance of both nations for development, peace and cooperation, which both foreign ministers said has strengthened during the last 18 years. Both governments currently advocate the establishment of a multipolar world for the self-determination of peoples free of foreign interference. In this sense, Arreaza reiterated the importance of the strategic relationship with Iran in the framework of his counterpart's visit to Latin America.
Now we are at the climax of our relationship in this historical moment with the government of Iran and President Rouhani. In that vision of a multipolar world, a world without impositions, without dominations, a world of peace, a world of security that coincides with the world that is depicted in this charter, the Charter of the United Nations. It could be better written, it could be different, but it is here drafted. That world with which we dreamed 75 years ago in 1945, the world that we strive to create and that we know Iran wants to create.
For this part, the Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister stressed that Western nations cannot intervene into Eastern nations' faith.
The rise of China, the rise of new emerging powers, the fact that the voices do not occur in the West, that the West cannot determine what happens in the rest of the world means that the West is desperate. They are desperate. That is why they resort to terrorism. Terrorism against the Iranian people, against the people of Venezuela, preventing these people from using their own resources because Iran and Venezuela are not asking for handouts. We have enough resources. We do not need handouts. They are terrorizing our population, preventing them from using their own resources.
And Iran Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif will begin on Thursday a working visit to Cuba to meet the island authorities. According to the official website of the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the minister will carry out other activities of interest. Previously, the Iranian Foreign Minister traveled to Venezuela, where he was received by his counterpart Jorge Arreaza to comply with a high-level work agenda. Recently, Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh informed that Javad Zarif also plans to take part in the swearing ceremony of Bolivia's president-elect Luis Arce. Cuba acknowledged the bilateral cooperation relations and recognizes Iran's right to develop research, production and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without any discrimination. Furthermore, the island was rejected the reimposition of sanctions and unilateral coercive measures on Iran by the U.S. government.
C1-2 del candidato vacunal cubano Soberana 01 en el Centro Nacional de Toxicología.
According to the official website of the ministry, also the Cuban antibody itozolumab received authorization to start a phase 3 clinical trial in COVID-19 patients in the US, Mexico and Brazil, reported on Wednesday Cuba's Center for Molecular Immunology. Developed by that institution in collaboration with the India's Biocon company, this trial will consolidate the scientific evidence that supports the effective inclusion of the drugs in the Cuba's protocol for the COVID-19 treatment. Winner of one of the national awards of the Cuban Academy of Science in 2014 in the biomedical science category, the product has an anti-inflammatory and immunoregulatory effect. Cuban experts assured that this innovative product of Cuban biotechnology allowed reducing the number of critical patients. St. Vincent and the Grenadines this Thursday decides the new government of the nation at the polls, amidst observers from the Caribbean community and under strict biosafety protocols by COVID-19. According to the Electoral Office, 98,119 citizens of St. Vincent are called to exercise their right to vote in the general elections, an increase of more than 8,500 voters compared to 2015 elections. Polling stations will open their tables for regular voters between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. local time. Meanwhile, just over 240 individuals serving a quarantine period will vote from closing time after receiving a medical certificate, confirms the Searchlight newspaper. In the elections, Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves and the Unitary Labour Party seeks a fifth consecutive term on the Caribbean island ahead of the opposition New Democratic Party, and its candidate would win Friday. Ida downgraded in Honduran territory and became a tropical depression. Yet, the strong gusts of wind and especially the large amount of rain severely affected the Central American nation. Despite the significant drop in its maximum wind speeds, the U.S. National Hurricane Center warned of flooding that currently affect large part of the country. San Pedro Sula, one of the most affected areas, reported the death of a minor and the evacuation of at least 3,000 people. The Choluteca River that crosses the center of Tegucigalpa overflowed and authorities have closed access to all its bridges. And we have more news coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. John Magufuli was sworn in for a second five-year term as president of Tanzania. The ceremony was attended by several African leaders. The event was held under strong security measures due to repeated threats from the opposition groups with the support from Washington. Strong health measures mark as well the ceremony because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Magufuli, who won the majority of the parliamentary seats, affirmed during the ceremony that this will be his last mandate and that he will dedicate part of his presidency to improve the economy, the security of the country, and his relations with the rest of African nations. Opposition parties assured that the electoral process was plagued with irregularities. The White House described the accusations as plausible. Stockholders of the Tigray region in northern Ethiopia, where the country's lawmakers have endorsed a 6-month state of emergency, a day after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered military operations there in an escalation of a long-running feud. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on Wednesday announced he had ordered a military operation in the country's northern Tigray region, saying it came in response to the deadly attack on a federal army camp by the local ruling party. The move marked a dramatic escalation in a protracted feud that analysts warned could lead to a devastating conflict in Africa's second most populous country. The government also declared a 6-month state of emergency Wednesday in Tigray, where internet and phone connections were down. This Thursday, England's 56 million people entered in a second coronavirus lockdown, with more doubts about the stringent policy than the first time around. Prime Minister Boris Johnson abandoned a recently introduced system of regional curbs and announced an England-wide shutdown after dire warnings that hospitals could soon be overwhelmed with COVID-19 cases. But while opinion polls suggest overall public backing from the stay-at-home policy, concerns are mounting about the impact on the economy and on mental health. A sizable minority of 32 MPs from the ruling Conservative Party voted against the measures on Wednesday. England joined the other nations of the UK in imposing another lockdown. Britain is among the world's hardest hit countries, with nearly 48,000 COVID-19 related deaths and nearly 1 million cases.
It isn't like the first one. The first one was like an alien world, you know, but I think that people feel like me. We don't want it to go back to quite what it was before. They're not ready for that. We might be forced into it, but our government is so undecided about what it's going to do.
I'm feeling okay about it. I think I'm quite lucky. I work at the hospital, so I'm still in my routine of coming into work, and that's not really changed for me. I think I'm also hoping that it will be a bit shorter than the last one. So yeah, I think I feel okay in that sense.
Will I be more tempted to go and see friends? I suppose, to be honest, possibly yes. But, you know, in terms of being able to do stuff, there isn't going to be anything to do anyway, so I will be adhering to it.
And the European Commissioner for the Economy, Paolo Gentiloni, said Thursday the public debt of the Eurozone is expected to increase due to spending by member countries to revive economies deeply affected by the coronavirus.
Debt to GDP ratio is projected to reach 102% in the euro area this year and 94% in the EU, which is about 15 percentage points above the 2019 level.
Gentiloni also stated that the second wave of the coronavirus pandemic stalled an emerging recovery in Europe. The EU warned that the economy will not return to pre-virus normality before 2023. The negative forecast raised hopes for a quick turnaround of the European economy and raised questions whether more stimulus will be needed to alert more lasting damage. The Commissioner for Economy pointed to a whole series of danger signs, including higher unemployment and soaring debt, the levels for countries that will need to keep spending to revive their economies.
The pandemic caused the deepest recession in EU history in the first half of 2020, surpassing that in the great financial crisis. This contraction, which was uneven among member states, was followed by a strong rebound in the third quarter. This forecast implies that GDP for the EU as a whole will be just shy of its pre-pandemic level by end of 2022. But unfortunately, this is not the case for all member states. The most severely hit euro area countries are forecast to reach double-digit deficit ratios in 2020, namely Belgium, France, Italy, and Spain.
Italian police say Thursday to have seized over 900 kilos of pure cocaine hidden in a container of frozen mussels from Chile. According to police authorities, the drugs will have been worth about 186 million euros on the streets after being caught several times. The 800 parcels of drugs packed within 37 bags hidden in the container of seafood were identified with the use of special scanners at the port of Gioia Tauro in the southernmost region of Italy. The Calabrian port is one of the main entry points for drugs and other contraband into Italy and has been under special surveillance by authorities for years. We have come to the end of this news brief, but remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. Also, if you feel so inclined, join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, my name is GLADYS QUESADA, and thank you for watching.